Hello and welcome to Advancement Project California's State of the State, A Just Recovery. I'm Wendy Killian, the Deputy Director at AP California, and I'll also be your MC. On behalf of my colleagues, we are honored that you've joined us for our third annual, first ever virtual State of the State. At our first two State of the State events, way back in 2018 and 2019, if anyone can remember back that far, we had two incredible conversations with activists about the state of race and politics to better understand how to collectively build our power to demand structural change. And tonight, we are focusing on what a just recovery will look like for all Californians. We've invited some of the state's leading thinkers and doers to share with us their ideas for how we can together ensure that this recovery will not deepen injustice, but will instead dismantle inequitable systems and build back something better for all generations to come. If the pandemic, the recession, the murders of unarmed Black folks, the attacks on our Asian friends and neighbors, coupled with the assault on our democratic principles and institutions, and 4 years of you-know-who have taught us anything, it's that we can't go back to normal, because normal didn't and hasn't worked for so many people for a very long time. And as we all know, people of color have been especially hard hit and frankly, traumatized. These past few years have ripped away any illusions we might have had about the structural barriers to fairness and justice that exist in our society. They have disabused us of the notion that democracy is revered and cherished by all Americans. And they have made it crystal clear that when we starve our government, we are unable to meet the challenges we face. More than anything, these last 4 years have shown that leadership matters, and competent, compassionate leadership is essential to meet the complex trials we face. And a leader isn't just an elected official or the head of a labor union or a nonprofit. We, all of us on Zoom and Facebook, we are leaders, and we must harness our collective power and keep striving for a more perfect union. Thank you again for joining this important discussion from your living rooms, kitchen tables, or wherever you get your best Wi-Fi connection. We welcome your kids, your partners, and your pets as well. I know we are all zoomed out, but I'm grateful that we have access to technology to bring us together tonight. So for those of you joining us on Zoom, we have people monitoring the chat, as Jasenia and Sedalia said. So if you have technical problems, don't ask me because I won't know the answer, but they will definitely help you out. But we also want to hear from you on the chat about anything that resonates, so please feel free to type something in. It can be found, the chat, on the bottom of your screen. And for those of you on Facebook, we also welcome your comments as well. Before we start our program, I'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors. Thank you, Niantic Inc., creators of Pokemon Go, and the Achieving America Family Foundation for making this event possible. Thank you so much. And all of you joining on Zoom, weren't the whispers incredible? I'll leave it to Sedalia to do all the singing tonight, but I know that we're all big fans. So thank you again to the Whispers for their incredible song and your decades of activism. For our program tonight, we will hear from a panel of amazing leaders, women of color who are working tirelessly to make California a better and brighter place for all of us. Moderating the panel will be the lone guy, my boss, AP California's Executive Director, John Kim. Yay, John! Now let's get this incredible program started with our keynote by California's own Congressmember Karen Bass, who was re-elected to her 6th term, representing South LA in the 37th Congressional District. In the wake of last summer's uprisings, Congressmember Bass introduced the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, the most transformative piece of policing legislation to ever pass in a chamber of Congress. And now more than ever, we need to get that signed into law. Many of us also know Congressmember Bass as the founder of COCO, Community Coalition, the trailblazing and beloved South LA community organizing nonprofit. While it was her intention to join us live today, she needs to be on the House floor for some key votes tonight. Therefore, her comments are pre-recorded. Please join me in welcoming to the Zoom stage Congressmember Karen Bass.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. And let me just say that I want to begin by congratulating and thanking the Advancement Project, thanking you for all of the years that you have had in contributing to our struggle, compiling the data that we need to organize and the data that we need to legislate. You have made a huge difference. And I am honored to share this event with 3 very powerful women, grassroots organizing, leading the labor movement, a leader in the state legislature. The tremendous contributions that you have made really show that California can lead the way to progressive change in our country. When I think of what we have in our state, the state of our state is doing pretty well, especially if you think about the rest of the country. We are in an incredible historical moment, and I characterize it as a great moment of hope, incredible hope, but also incredible danger. We're all recovering from the last 4 years where we actually had an open white supremacist in the White House. We have had a president who empowered and unleashed a white supremacist movement that was always there, but he gave it life, he fed it oxygen, and we are paying the consequences, and that is an incredible danger. We know that they were so afraid of the inevitable demographic shift in our country. In a few short years, the rest of the country is going to be like California, majority folks of color. And unfortunately, instead of embracing the rainbow in our country, that terrifies some people to the point where they want to alter the structure of our democracy in this country. We had a president who fomented racial attacks on every single group: African Americans, Latinx community, API community, Native Americans, and in fact, he ended his presidency by spending all last year attacking Asians by trying to blame China for COVID-19, and whether COVID-19 started there, I think we know it started there. Very doubtful that the Chinese would diabolically spread the virus, but the idea that he fomented such anger that it has led to an incredible and tragic increase in anti-Asian violence. And so as we rallied around African Americans, as we rallied around the Latinx community, the Native American community, we will rally around and embrace our Asian American sisters and brothers and fight back this racist attack. 2020 was an awful year, and I don't know of anybody that was sad to see the year end. We all watched people we know get sick and die. We had a pandemic, and we had no leadership in the country that allowed the pandemic to kill over 500,000 Americans by the time the year ended. But we also saw tremendous hope out of an incredible tragedy. The world witnessed the torture, the slow torture and murder of George Floyd. And no one could deny that this wasn't just incredible police brutality and frankly homicide, murder. Now there is a trial that is taking place that the entire world is going to watch and see whether or not our cries for human rights around the world is not complete hypocrisy here at home, if we cannot find our way to a guilty verdict for such an obvious murder. But in the midst of that tragedy, we saw a new chapter of a long-term movement for social and racial justice occur in our country, with hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets. And because of all of that power in the streets, it has led to legislative change all around the country in terms of police reform, and it gave us the power and the wind in our sails to pass legislation in the House of Representatives, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And obviously it is not going to end police brutality, but it makes a huge step forward for the first time, actually holding police officers accountable, making it easier to sue them, make it easier to prosecute them, raising the standards of policing in the United States, 18,000 police departments and no national standards, banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants. Those are some features of the bill. But that bill only passed the House of Representatives because of the massive movement. And now, as the trial is underway, we are making another attempt at passing that bill. We passed it again in March out of the House of Representatives, and now it is in the Senate. I actually am hopeful that we are going to get a bill on President Biden's desk. And I'll be happy that we've made a huge step forward, but all of us know that whatever lands on President Biden's desk will not be enough, and we'll have to continue fighting to have police function to protect and serve in all communities, not be warriors in one community and guardians in other communities. And so with the movement for racial justice around George Floyd tragedy, we saw systemic racism, racial equity become part of the popular vernacular in the United States. That is an incredible moment of hope, and that is one that we have to make sure that we capture. We have a long way to go, but at least now the conversation is beginning. But with all that happened last year in terms of the tragic COVID epidemic and the incredible lengths that some people were doing in certain states to suppress the vote, we organized and we won. In the state of Georgia, sending a black man and a Jewish man, both Democrats of course, to the U.S. Senate was a phenomenal accomplishment. Electing a president who in his inaugural speech says white supremacy, we could have never imagined the president ever using that term, period, but especially in an inaugural speech, and then to make racial equity a key part of his agenda. I think that is an amazing step forward, but all of us know what is really going to move the needle on racial equity is going to be our ability to organize. It cannot just be done at the top. It is wonderful to have an administration place racial equity at the center, but it is going to be on us to make sure that it actually happens. So that's why I consider this moment a moment of incredible hope, but incredible danger. The danger again, the day after that amazing victory in Georgia, what happened? An attempted coup in the United States of America, an insurrection. All of the white supremacists who had been fomenting and foaming at the mouth, especially after they lost the election, attacked the Capitol of the United States. And although that attack only lasted for a few hours, make no mistake, as we have a movement for racial and social justice, they have a movement to move the needle back, to move our history back, to move our history back 100 years. They have a movement that could lead to the destruction of democracy in this country and the rise of fascism. Make no mistake about that. This is a dangerous moment. But it's a moment of incredible hope. It's a moment of incredible danger. But where I believe that we have advanced so much and achieved a level of sophistication in our own movement that we will be able to overcome whatever they put in our way. But we know the only way that we will overcome and the only way we will succeed is by moving forward with an inside and an outside strategy. The inside strategy is electing progressives to office, electing people to office who will lead with a set of values and who will lead with a clear, concrete agenda. but we cannot accomplish our work if there is not the outside pressure. Even when progressives are in office, we need the pressure, we need that support, because that allows us to bring about the change that is needed. And so I am hopeful overall that we are turning a new page in the history book in the United States. And I believe that new page, that new chapter, will have all of us at the center, because I believe that through our organizing, we will ultimately be victorious. But without institutions like the Advancement Project, without the leaders like the 3 other sisters who are on the program today, that change will not come. So I just want to again congratulate you for the work that you are doing, and thank you for giving me the honor of speaking with you today.
Thank you, Representative Bass. We have been so fortunate to hear from her at several of our events during these tumultuous and uncertain times. And every single time, it's been a salve to our anxious collective psyche to hear her crystal clear vision and the values in action. So thank you so much. Let's now hear from one of our favorite state leaders, Senator Marielena Durazo. Senator Durazo has been called into some critical meetings in the evening, this evening, so we couldn't be live with her. But that's cool with me, because no matter how much I've gotten to know her and to work with her, I'm still super nervous around here. You know, I was just a pup when she was changing the face of labor and political power here in LA. And now she represents LA's 24th district in the state Senate. So let's hear her vision for what a just recovery will look like in the state of California.
Hi, I'm State Senator Marielena Duraso, and I'm really glad to be able to join you today virtually, I know. Thank you, Advancement Project, and thank you, John, for your leadership and pulling us all together whenever we need and moving forward and finding the right policies. 2020 pulled back the curtain across so many of our institutions, our healthcare, our economy, the housing market, just to name a few. And it's pretty clear who gets hit hardest in an economic crisis. We know the answer. It's going to be communities of color and women. We watched the crisis unfold. It hit us hard through a recession. At the same time, we were going through more police brutality. So it always seems there's an emergency, it falls hardest on us. And we're under immense strain even before COVID-19. But after the pandemic hit, loss of jobs, lower wages, less generational wealth, and the digital divide. Women in particular are really struggling in the COVID economy. We remember December's jobs report showing 140,000 jobs lost, all held by women. In total, women lost 156,000 jobs while men gained 16,000. The fact that on average a white family has 10 times more net wealth than a black family, that does not exist in a vacuum. It reverberates throughout the rest of the quality of life, in health outcomes and so many other ways. We need to make profound changes on our economy if we hope to reverse all of these trends. I believe our government has a major role to play in beginning to right these wrongs and making sure we have a better recovery in California. This has been our fight, my fight. In the short term, we have to survive. We have to get past this. We have to stay alive. We're in the process of dispersing billions of dollars in rental assistance to men and families. We're providing assistance to mom and pop landlords who have invested their life savings into rental properties. This week, I'm hopeful we will pass and the governor will sign our hospitality workers bill to rehire and ensuring those workers who have been laid off as a result of the pandemic have the right to get back to the jobs they were at before the pandemic. Again, these workers are predominantly women, immigrants over the age of 50 who have the lowest statistical possibility of even being interviewed for a new job. We, as government, have got to make sure they get the right to the jobs back. We also provided direct cash relief to undocumented workers left out by the official safety net. We are not going to give up on health for all. One good next step is to make sure that our low-income seniors who qualify for Medi-Cal have access to real health care, regardless of immigration status, instead of relying on these last-minute emergency services. But we cannot stand still with just short-term solutions. We have to take charge of shaping our economy. In LA County, 18% of the population went unemployed. At the same time, we were facing wildfires and all the smoke that went all the way through the state. No borders there. And it showed the urgent need for climate action. So how can we recover from COVID-19, record temperatures and wildfires, and other contamination in our environment? There is hope, and I think it lies in a path for worker-led, climate-resilient economic recovery. The California Workforce Development Board submitted a new report to the legislature on how to get there. In last year's legislative cycle and before the pandemic, I floated 2 ideas to jumpstart the conversation around the creation of green jobs as a catapult to expand a more equitable economy. One would allow the Natural Resources Agency, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and other state conservancies to establish climate resiliency grants that provide workforce development. Another would have increased in transparency to guarantee that our public dollars and tax breaks given to companies that are creating the jobs they promised when bidding for taxpayer-funded contracts and incentive programs. California has many examples of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating good jobs, and broadening opportunities for disadvantaged workers. Reducing emissions is a very critical part of our future. But what excites me the most are the labor agreements that produce, guarantee family-supporting jobs and employed workers from some of the lowest wage-earning counties in the state. These occupations pay an hourly wage that allows adults with less than a college degree to provide meaningfully for their families' needs. The use of apprentices. Ensures workforce training and a career pipeline instead of train and pray, the untested training programs that don't ensure access to actual jobs. Instead of that, you're tapping into an existing high-quality training infrastructure. Apprenticeships also support equity because they enable participants to earn the paycheck while they learn. Instead of having debt when apprentices graduate, they have a job with family-supported wages and benefits and a career. These are the kinds of agreements we must expand between business, labor, community groups, and especially for investments that get our public dollars, public funds. Currently, they're used in public transit and high-speed rail infrastructure, but we could do a lot more. Agencies or entities administering public or ratepayer funds can also use these agreements for energy efficiency retrofits, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and other construction activities. We can also use these agreements in manufacturing, waste management, fire prevention, and other greenhouse gas reducing efforts. This principle has been applied in initiatives in my district, and I know they can be replicated in statewide initiatives. Prioritizing the creation of good jobs that also solve our environmental and climate issues are part of this new, strong economic recovery. This pandemic has left no doubt about the inequities in our society. This year, with some of the most significant stimulus packages at both the federal and state level, we have a once-in-my-generation opportunity to lay the groundwork to reverse all of these trends. Let's not let this opportunity get past us. Thank you all very much, and I'm so proud to partner with you on all the things moving forward. Gracias y si se puede.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Durazo. And now to the panel portion of the evening. I'm very excited to get into conversation with these next 2 leaders These women are easily some of the most powerful yet down-to-earth organizers and movement leaders in this state. April Verrett from SEIU 2015 has been a leading light in the labor movement to ensure that racial equity and worker rights are not mutually exclusive goals. In fact, she's been pushing all of us to understand that these fights are not only aligned, but interdependent with one another. Brenes from InnerCity Struggle, her and I have been in community together for over a decade. We've been raising our kids together in community. We've been getting in fights alongside one another in community. And I consider her one of my dearest friends in this movement. You know, after the recent rise in attacks on Asian Americans, it was compañeras like Maria that would reach out and call to check in to see how I and our family were doing in all of this. And so I'm so happy that the both of you could join us this evening. You know, for some context setting, for 13 years now, we've been stuck in this tragic name game, right? Like, how many compounding crises can you name? You know, from the pandemic and the violence and police violence and George Floyd and anti-Asian violence, you know, so on and on and on. None of us have made it through this past year unscathed. Some have lost so much more than others. And we need to be real about how scarred all of us are from this, the healing that will be required, and the pieces that we're now left with and the need to make sense of them. But at the same time, there is a definitive shift in the air. We are in a moment of real transition and real contradictions. As Congressmember Bass pointed out, in front of us sits both a lot of hope and a lot of danger. For my family, you know, we now get to feel the hope of our children hugging their fully vaccinated grandparents, or us being able to sit out in the sun and cheer on our children as they play Little League. But at the same time, after telling my wife how many Asian Americans I saw at a particular park a couple of weeks ago, my son Ellis jumped in and said, I can never go back to that park because where there are a lot of us, that's where they target us. And for us here in California, with the American Rescue Plan, we have an extraordinary opportunity to live into our often espoused, but too often performative love for racial equity, right? Like we have, but at the same time, we have this looming recall attempt that threatens once again to make a circus out of our state politics and creates an ill-gotten opening for the right to take real statewide power and move us back a generation. And for us as a nation, as a country, you know, my wife and I finally got our first shots a few days ago, and it was an amazingly hopeful moment to experience this massive collective effort, this massive good that can happen when government does its job and we all do our job by coming together towards a common goal. But even with that hope, we come home to the news of yet another mass shooting, another Black life lost to police violence, and in this case, it's Daunte Wright, and the continued drumbeat of the right's war on science and facts. We are in one of those confusing transitional times when there are contradictions abound, opposing signals that shroud the best path forward for us in this movement. You know, at least last spring, when we here at AP California and others were starting to ring the bell on the racial disparities that were emerging from the pandemic, we tactically knew how to play it. Yes, we were on our heels. Yes, we were playing defense, but we and many of our partners rallied together to hold the line the best we could. But then in the fall, with the Floyd uprisings and through the election, we shifted gears and started to play an offensive game and to push harder like we've never pushed before. But in this moment, this transitional moment, what's the play? Do we defend the wins we secured last year? Or do we play offense again to ensure that we never, ever go back to normal? Or do we have to do both? One thing I know for sure is that this is not the time to sit back. This is not the time to be mystified by the complexity of it. This is the time for us to move. So often in our history, the energy and focus is around the main event, when in fact, it's the aftermath, the response, the few years after the main event that sets the political stage for a generation, right? So after the Emancipation Proclamation and Reconstruction, we got the evolution of white supremacy into the Jim Crow. After the ending of the 1918 pandemic and the Roaring '20s, we got the Great Depression. And after the power and new heights of the civil rights movement, we got the war on drugs and the ensuing mass incarceration state in this country. We cannot take our eyes off the ball now. Yes, last year and still today is about surviving, but tomorrow is about creating. It's about creating what the California of 2050 will look like, what the California that we'll be handing down to our children will look like. And so now let me bring in the panelists into this conversation. And again, I'm so grateful and excited to hear their vision of what a just recovery will look like. April and Maria, you know, I have every hope that once this is over, that we'll again break bread together, as we have so many times in the past. And I have every confidence that at some point in the near future, we'll be lifting a glass to celebrate what we're about to achieve. And if we could just vision cast to that moment when we're lifting this glass to celebrate, let me ask you, April, first, what's changed? What are we celebrating concretely?
So first of all, thank you, John, for the invitation to be here. Cannot think of a place I'd rather be with you and, of course, with my good friend, Maria. Listening to you talk, I am hear Amanda Gorman's voice in the back of my head saying, "For there is always light." And I'm going to butcher her words, but there is light if we are brave enough to see it. We are the light if we're brave enough to be it. And so as I look forward to the next 5 years of raising my glass, it is to be bold in the way that you are calling on us to be bold. And in 5 years, if we act boldly, if we are brave, if we are the light, I believe we can together make significant strides to dismantle the systemic and structural underpinnings that create the conditions that far too many in our communities live in. I wake up every day concentrating on how do we end poverty. And I believe poverty, which is the root cause of so much anguish in our communities, is it's by design. It is because we have systems and structures across our society, in our government, in our institutions, that create the results that they were designed to create. And so I believe to really transform our community and get to a different place, we gotta go to systems and structures. We can no longer stand by and just put Band-Aids on gaping wounds. And so much of our policy, as proud as I am of the strides that we have made together, so much of our policy is just about a Band-Aid. If you look at our policy around housing and homelessness, we put people in temporary supportive housing. We are not doing enough to create the conditions where people don't end up on the streets in the first place. And so I want to raise a glass in 5 years to changing the systems and structures that get us to where we are.
That's right. I mean, too many times poverty is cast as a set of individual choices or a matter of choices, when I would dare anybody to go live in an impoverished neighborhood for a year and see how well you come out in terms of your health outcomes or what have you, because it's the systems, it's the ecology, right? So thank you so much, April. Maria, what are we lifting a glass to?
Well, I also want to start off by expressing my appreciation for you, John, for the Advancement Project, and for April, both your organizations, SEIU 2015, have been instrumental supporters of inner city struggle in our work in the last year, which has been a very hard year for our community here in the east side of LA. Devastation with the spread of COVID-19 and the inequitable impact in terms of cases and deaths. And, like an LA Times article wrote late last year, life has been rewired here in a negative way. But despite the challenges, and what keeps me going in this fight despite the challenges is the young people that I get to work with and organize. And one of the most heartbreaking impacts of the pandemic has been the trauma inflicted on youth of color, Black and brown youth here in LA County. Many who've been forced to step in into their families and communities in new ways, taking on, work as essential workers, low wage jobs to help their families, helping in their homes, be the homeschool teacher for their younger siblings, all without the support that they need to thrive and have better social, emotional outcomes for them as adolescents. But, for young people and for the families we work with, many, who are also essential workers, they're ready to keep up the fight. They have seen the inequities exposed in ways that haven't been exposed in the past: racial injustice, income inequality, lack of affordable housing, lack of a sufficient eviction protection. So I believe that in our community, there's a sense of strengthened resiliency that I think we have to continue to support and grow, so that in 5 years, not only do we win greater public investments in education, in housing stability, in youth investment, but that we see renewed and expanded leadership at the grassroots level, ready and able to continue to build power for our communities. I think power is going to be key to advancing racial justice in this next period that is so important. So I think I come to all of you, in this discussion with a heavy heart, but like Congresswoman Karen Bass said, hope, as we rise from this hardship, let's continue to push on and push forward.
Every time I hear you speak and every time we work together, it humbles and reminds me that an organization like ours focused on research and policy, those are helpful ingredients for change, but power is the real prerequisite for change. And so appreciative of the work that you all do in terms of community-based power building. But so thinking about this vision of where we want to get to and starting to shift the structures, to focus on youth, to really build community power, what's in our way? What's holding us back from achieving some of these things, and how do we overcome some of these challenges? This time, if I could start with Maria.
Well, I think this narrative and this embedded system of white supremacy in our society, in our systems, we have to continue to challenge and dismantle in order to advance narratives, conversations, and investments that bring justice to our communities. I think about, campaigns that are currently underway that we're working with our allies and with our young people and the families that we work with to increase investment in education, to decriminalize youth of color, to put protections in place so that low-income tenants can stay in their homes here in Los Angeles and in their communities, which are essential to the safety net. And I think part of what we come up against every time is the status quo, this embedded notion that our communities, people of color, women of color, youth of color, tenants of color, are not deserving of greater investment and resources and protections. And I think our greatest strength in the work that we do and in the work that we're advancing is the voices and the testimonies and the heart that our communities carry when they do this work. We're part of the Brothers, Sons, Selves Coalition, which is a countywide youth of color-led effort. And one of the mantras of the young people in the campaign work that they do is when we see us. That's what informs their work. And what that means is that we are naming our issues, we're studying our own material conditions, and out of that, we're creating solutions that get to this issue of dismantling structural racism in LA County and beyond. So I think, with our communities, they know that there is inequality. They often don't know that by working together, we can do something about it. By building power, we can make changes. So I'm hopeful that, through that analysis and that commitment as organizations, as coalitions with decision makers, that we can increase equitable investments in our schools, that we can create youth departments that are fully funded in our city, in our county, that we can have rent relief, eviction protections, mortgage relief for our most impacted communities, and that, those that have borne the brunt of this pandemic, like women, like children, are invested in pushing our decision makers to think boldly, like guaranteed income for low-income residents, highest need young people, foster youth. And so, these are some of the ideas that are emerging out of our membership. The senator, this is the last thing I'll say, the senator mentioned once in a generation investment that's coming from the federal government to our county, to our city, and to our educational system. In our case, the work we're focused on is LEUSD. And there has to be meaningful engagement of those most impacted to ensure that the investments are equitable. And so, I'm hopeful that by working in coalition, by lifting up the voices at the grassroots level and building power and being relentless and persistent in our work, that in the 5-year period, we can dismantle, the status quo narrative that says we don't deserve more and we can't. I think that's one of the biggest fights.
Yeah. Fully funded, right? That's the word. That's the key term here. I mean, between what's about to be a pretty strong economic recovery and all the resources coming, it's not a lot of room for elected officials to kind of half step at this particular moment, right? And so how do we make sure they come in for reals is a key question. April, talking about poverty, breaking it down in terms of what's the real structural changes, no more Band-Aids. What's challenging for us? What are our obstacles to realizing your vision?
Great question. And dare I say, we are in many ways our own biggest obstacle. And this is what I mean. White supremacy that Maria was talking about has done a job on us too. And many, many people of color practice white supremacy. And one of the things that I became acutely aware of with all the time I spent with myself last year is how much shame I carry around from growing up in poverty. And it dawned on me that the shame that so many of us feel is because we have been told it's all our fault. Yeah. That the world that we have lived in, survived, is our fault. Our schools are bad because we can't learn, right? Our air is dirty because we made it that way. We can't keep jobs because we're too lazy and we don't want to work, right? All of these things, this narrative that has been perpetrated by white supremacy has done a number on us. And we have to throw off those shackles and realize it is not our fault that the world is the way it is, but it is our responsibility to fight to change it. I also fundamentally believe that we are also afraid. that we have to move past our fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite our fear. And there are some of us who are afraid of losing what little power we have, right?
Yeah.
That if as a labor leader, I link and align with the Black Lives Matter movement, or that I link and align with community organizations or with the environmental justice movement, that I might lose some power. I believe we can't win if we all don't figure out how we work together, particularly people of color, right? So as a Black person, if I cannot figure out how I wrap my arms around immigrants and know that my fight is the same fight as the immigrants fight, or as an Asian person's fight in this moment, shame on me, right? And that my pain from a legacy of slavery, it comes from the same place as the pain that you all have. And so I think we got to learn how our movement have to come together in intersectional ways, and that we only stand to gain, and there is nothing to fear by sharing power and building power and using power together.
Damn, April, this is why we love you. This is why we love you. And you show up so differently as not only a labor leader, but a leader just in general, in terms of being real about our own struggles, right? Like they say fish don't know what the ocean means because we're swimming in it. And we, even as people of color, don't know exactly how to get our arms around white supremacy because it's all around us. And a lot of times the young folks, I don't totally understand it, but one term they came up with that I totally get is gaslighting, because the system's been gaslighting us for a long time. I don't get it either, but sure. Telling us it's our fault, and we've internalized that. Yeah. I've heard it. I know it. I'm down with the young people, and that's what they say is the gaslighting. And so I so appreciate that, and I appreciate your call for we got to look inside in terms of the obstacles before we look outside. So given the challenges, but given your vision, what are the opportunities here? What are the things that we need to best take advantage of and click into and really leverage in these next few years as we move ahead? I worry that the eyes being opened around racial injustice will start to close. I worry that all the wokeness will start to fall asleep, and the window that we have, right? And so, but how does this look like? What's the opportunities here, and what should we do to take best advantage of them? April, if you can get us started with that.
Sure, and I think it's gonna take us creating some opportunities that don't currently exist, because I do believe some of the doors that are currently open will close. Right? As much progress as we've made around racial justice and coming to a shared understanding of our shared struggle, I think we've also taken as many steps back, right? Donald Trump got more votes for president in 2020 than anyone in history, only second to Joe Biden, right? That says something about where we are as a country. And so I don't want to pretend like we only got, clear roads ahead. We got some hills and some mountains to climb. But I think that there is opportunity, because the last year has been so bad. And for one, I know one of the things that I lost was my patience. I am out of patience for only operating at the margins, right? I am out of patience for just good enough. And so I am determined, and I know that I share that determination with the two of you and with others to walk this road while we make it to a better future. And so I'm committed to keep my foot on the gas, and I know some others are too, and we just can't let up, right? Yeah. I think there's huge opportunity with the current tone of our federal government. It's not perfect, but to see, people lead like Congresswoman Bass and pass the American Rescue Plan, and for Joe Biden to introduce the American Jobs Plan, which calls on huge infrastructure and, dare I say, a $400 billion investment in care, right? To rethink how we think about infrastructure and care and people and what people need. Like, we are open to a whole set of conversations that we weren't having a year ago. And so we got to lean into those. And I think that leaning in will create even more opportunity.
Yeah, I saw a thing somewhere that, not having childcare is just as bad as having a broken bridge in terms of getting to work. So they're not acting like care is not infrastructure. It's just crazy in this day and age that we live in. Maria, what do you say in terms of the opportunities that we have in front of us and how we should be pushing at this point?
Well, I totally agree with what April has shared and laid out. And what comes to mind in terms of what is needed, and I think what we have an opportunity to do, is a system shock of, increasing investment based on equity and leveraging this moment where, the public, our communities are much more aware of inequality because of how devastating and destabilizing the pandemic has been. So, very similar to April and many of our allies, this sense of urgency, I think, is what's driving me, the organization that I work with and the coalitions that we're a part of, that we have to lean in now, we have to act now, and, lift up the values that we have talked about for decades, dismantling systems of oppression, closing the gaps in income inequality, in education, and in the ways that our young people are criminalized and barred from opportunity and success in their lives. And so I think, given, what we have been through, I think there's, again, an opportunity to work together and leverage the contradictions, exploit the contradictions of, we have in administration, both locally at different levels of government, at the state, at the federal government, saying, they want better opportunity, they want more equality. We have to push on this idea of equity and mobilize, toward a framework that's about restoration, that is about transformation and humanizing systems to invest in all people, with a lens toward people of color, addressing, anti-Black racism, addressing patriarchy, addressing attacks on LGBTQ communities and all communities of color. I think, having that comprehensive lens and then coming together on winnable campaigns in the short term with an eye on long-term structural change, I think is going to be critical. And, building broad-based strategic alliances between labor, community organizations, young people. I mean, in order to win the type of change we're going to need to build back better, as our administration has articulated, it's really going to take all of us and a broad-based strategy. And it's just critical that there's investment at the grassroots level so that those solutions resonate with our community and actually address, long-term embedded racial injustice and structural racism. So I think there's so much opportunity for cohesion. And, I think leaning on each other is going to be critical. And, laying out what is the strategy, what are the resources we're going to need in order to implement an effective approach to transforming conditions here locally and statewide. So I know I'm more hopeful after this conversation. I think looking at the broader lens as well as the grassroots lens, I think that's so important. That interplay is so critical, because a lot is happening at the federal level. But I think, to me, what matters is, what's happening at the neighborhood level, at the family level, and what is the experience of, everyday people in our communities when they go to their schools, as they're experiencing displacement or lack of access to, quality in employment. Those are the things I think that matter. And how do we bridge all of that through our relationships and our coalitions in order to leverage the larger opportunities that make those grassroots changes that will improve the quality of life for our communities. So I think all those levels and strategies are going to be so important, and make sure that our movements are led by those that have been most impacted, not just by oppression, but by the devastating impacts of this pandemic as well.
This past year, fatigue, let's be real about how fatigued we are, given everything we've had to deal with. It's felt like there was something else that changed everything about our work every 10 days. And I know I felt it. Deep in my bones, I felt the fatigue and the confusion at times, and how to show up as a leader. But I know that the anchor, the thing that's kept me going through this, has been being able to spend time with community and compañeras like you, to really sort of anchor ourselves and help make meaning, and to also kind of bolster each other up. So not only thank you for sharing your wisdom and thoughts with the audience today, but thank you for just being there for me and for each other. It's been a hard journey, but it's made so much easier because I'm there with you. And for me, I can't wait to start drinking. I mean, I can't wait to celebrate our collective wins. Lift a glass and celebrate our collective wins in this next go around in the next few years. And so let me get back to it now for the audience. There you have it. That's what we've asked for extraordinary leaders, what their vision for just recovery sort of looks like. Really want to thank Congressmember Bass. We want to thank Senator Durazo, April Verrett, and Brenes for their extraordinary vision and for thinking. For Congressmember Bass, she's telling us and urging us to continue building our movement, because she knows, and we all know, the other side is doing the same. She's telling us to think about true and transformational police reform, to think about what it means to push an agenda inside and outside of the halls of power. For Senator Durazo, it's about centering women and women of color in this recovery, because they were the hardest hit. It's about shifting from surviving to making real long-term change, and in particular about creating good family-supporting jobs and the idea of merging climate resiliency with racial justice, economic recovery. And for April and Maria, the idea that we have lost patience with the half-step measures, the Band-Aids, that we need bold structural reform around racial injustice and around poverty, that we need to focus on our young people and the trauma that unfortunately we let inflict upon them. And what does it mean for them to recover from this space, not only in terms of learning loss, but also in terms of losses and hits that they've taken on the inside, and how do we help them recover from the inside out? And the panel also reminds us that we have to be real about the poison of white supremacy that we have in our own bodies and our own organizations, and how do we fix that from inside out is going to be a critical step as we move forward in this recovery. It's not all about calling out other people, right? As we move forward, and if we want to get to recovery together, it's about making ourselves strong and whole, doing so in community, but also not letting the gas off the pedal, right? It's all gas, no brakes from here, because we have to keep moving. So I have to ask the audience, what's your vision? What's your contribution going to be to a just recovery? When I look at the list of who's here watching us today, there are a lot of power plays in your own rights. Organizational movement leaders, donors, philanthropic leaders, and governmental leaders. What's the role you'll be playing to set up what California will look like in 2050? What have you heard tonight that will that you could see a role in supporting? And which of these extraordinary leaders and organizations they represent could you see supporting? Thank you all for being with us. And now I'll hand it back to my dear friend and colleague, Wendy Killian.
Well, that went by way too fast, didn't it? I could have listened to that fierce energy and wisdom for hours, but we're on Zoom and we would not do that to you. So thank you to Congressmember Karen Bass. We are so lucky to have you representing us in DC. Thank you for talking about the importance of the inside-outside strategy and reminding us that all of us have a role to play in shaping policy and fixing broken systems. Thank you. Thank you. And to our panelists, April and Maria, thank you so much for your words of encouragement and wisdom today. I feel better knowing that folks like you are guiding the way for our movement towards justice. You each brought key insights and tangible action items for us to do, and we are ready to work. And as April said, we cannot take our foot off the gas. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, thank you to the Whispers for your inspiring song. Art is an integral piece of the social justice movement, and we need you and we thank you. And lastly, one more shout out to our incredible sponsors. Yay, sponsors! And now for folks on Zoom, I'll be turning the program over to my colleagues who will be leading conversations on what you've heard today. Please stay on Zoom so that we can hear from you on what a just recovery looks like. And for our friends on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us. And now I bid you all good health. And again, many thanks for joining us tonight. It is my sincere hope that the next time we have our State of the State, we can be in person. Until then, take care. And now I'll be turning the program over to my colleagues. So remember, don't leave.